Good morning, fellow homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm and my farmhouse kitchen. Today I am making the recipe that inspired this YouTube channel. Last year we had a terrible tomato year. We had really high heat really early, much earlier than we normally have it, and the tomatoes were about a month to a month and a half behind where they would normally be, and we got about half the crop that we normally did, because when it's really hot, tomatoes don't set fruit because the pollen is not viable, and so they don't they just don't set any fruit. And so it took a long time for it to cool down, and we didn't get any fruit until mid-September, when we normally have tomatoes in August. And I was making my first batch of what we're making today, which is shakshuka. It is one of my very favorite things to make in the summer from fresh tomatoes and fresh garden produce. And it is basically a spicy tomato stew in which you poach some eggs. And I was in the middle of making shakshuka in September, and I was so excited to finally have fresh tomatoes and to be able to make this dish that I just adore and only make in the summertime. And I suddenly had this moment of like, everybody should know how to make this. Like, this is such a spectacular recipe. It's so good with fresh garden veggies, and every home gardener should be making this in their kitchen. And then I belong to a lot of gardening groups, online beginning farmer, beginning gardener groups. And I came to realize that there was an awful lot of people that had just started farming or gardening in the last couple of years due to COVID, and then due to food security issues and worrying about wanting to know where their food came from, or wanting to stockpile food due to inflation and other things, wanting to be able to better feed their family healthy foods. And they spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to garden that first year and struggle and ask a million questions. And then it comes, to August, when they start having a ton of actual produce coming out of all that effort. And the next question they often ask is, what do I do with this? So they're used to buying, one tomato from the store and making something, not having 15 pounds of tomatoes all at once. And so it was a inspiration to think about making this recipe and just helping people have better ideas for what to do with all that beautiful garden produce when they're not necessarily experienced gardeners or experienced cooks. So shakshuka, it starts out with a sweet bell pepper. This bell pepper is a little bit on the small side. This is everything you see here came from my garden just in the last week. So a sweet bell pepper, or you can use a bullhorn style pepper, and I have some of those I'll show you as well. Because this bell pepper is a little on the small side, I'm going to do one bell pepper and one bullhorn pepper. So good this time of year. That first pepper that you saw me cut up is actually a spicy pepper, and you can go with whatever level of spice you want. You could use a jalapeno, you could use a poblano. Those are both fairly mild. The one I cut up happened to be, it was from some saved seed, and it clearly had crossed. It started out as Aleppo, which is kind of a medium pepper that is often used dried, and it's clearly crossed with something. And I'm not sure what it's crossed with, but it's got a little bit of heat. So one spicy pepper, and then one large sweet pepper, or in my case several, because and this bell pepper is called bullnose, and it was grown at Monticello by Thomas Jefferson. It's a really lovely thick-walled pepper. You can see how nice and thick those pepper walls are. It's a lovely sweet pepper. I grow it every year. I love the story that this pepper has been around for a couple hundred years of seed saving. That just makes me happy. So bell pepper, sweet bell pepper, spicy pepper, and then this is a bullhorn style sweet pepper. This is called Carmen, and I have a video posted on a lot more Carmens, because I grow a lot of these. They don't tend to get sunburned the way bell peppers do, and so I like them better for larger production, and they're a beautiful, sweet, tasty pepper. They just have a different shape. And because they don't have those big wide shoulders, they're much less likely to get sunburned in the heat of the summer. And so I find them to be a lot more successful. And the video I posted was me just chopping all of these up and freezing them, because I freeze sweet peppers for use all year round. And so check that out. I'll put a link in the description below. Such a lovely sweet flavor. Although it does taste a little bit like onion because I cut up onion first. The onion that I cut up, that's an heirloom variety called Tropea. And I affectionately call them torpedo peppers because they're long and skinny. And it's an Italian heirloom, very tasty sweet pepper. Not great for storage long term, but really lovely for summer. And Tropea, you know, I'm in Walla Walla, Washington, land of Walla Walla onions. And so I don't grow Walla Wallas because I can get them really abundantly locally, and also because there's a ton of people growing them and growing them well, and I don't need to add to that. All right, so this skillet that you see in the sink here, I purposely left this here so that I could wash it on camera. There's a lot of myths out there about cast iron. One of them is that you should never, ever, ever get your cast iron wet, and that you should never, ever put soap on it. And both of those are total BS. If you've got a good polymerization of oil on your cast iron, it's pretty much attached molecularly to that iron, and there is no reason that you can't use a little bit of soap and water as long as you're taking good care of it and, you know, putting oil in it afterwards. I cooked some things in here last night that were not necessarily something that I want to be in my shakshuka. And so, you know, I use my cast iron for sweet dishes. I use my cast iron for savory dishes. To tell me that I can never get it wet is just kind of ridiculous. And you can see, like, there's no rust in this. It's in perfectly good shape because it's nicely seasoned. I don't really need to do this, but I'm gonna wipe it out so that you guys can see. In these spots, this is like where extra oil has stuck onto the existing seasoning that was already there, and that's not a big deal. Get a little olive oil in the bottom of this. While that's heating up, I'm gonna peel a couple of cloves of garlic. What this recipe is known for in terms of flavor profile, aside from obviously the beautiful fresh tomatoes, is paprika. It has a lot of paprika in it. So it's actually, I believe it's a Spanish dish originally. I will look that up and confirm that. And Spanish recipes often use a lot of paprika. Fun fact, paprika is just a type of pepper. And so you can grow and dry your own paprika, and I've been doing that for years. I used to sell a lot of peppers and some spice mixes at farmer's market, and sometimes I have paprika powder that I sell. And it's always really fun to teach people that, because people just have used paprika for years and they've never thought about what the actual plant looks like or where it comes from. And they think maybe it's some type of seed that's getting ground up, and the reality is it's just a pepper. And there's a million different kinds of paprika peppers, both from Spain and from Hungary are the two most famous locations. But any pepper that you think is a lovely flavor, you could just dry it and grind it and use it as a paprika if you wanted to. And you can go with a sweet type of paprika, or you can go with a spicy type of paprika. You can do a blend. Got a bunch of little fiddly small cloves of garlic in there, which I'm not a fan of. The other thing I just adore about this recipe is literally almost everything in it besides the olive oil and the salt comes from my own garden. And I just get such a kick out of being able to make an entire recipe from my own garden. So I'm going to transfer all of this over to our skillet. And I want a long cook on this with quite a bit of browning. So I'm not trying to burn anything, but that's where a lot of that flavor is going to come from. And it's part of the flavor profile of this particular dish to actually have some caramelization on your onions and peppers. And so that's what I'm aiming for. So these are going to cook for a good while. And so I'm going to get these going before I cut up my tomatoes. You can use any kind of an onion in this. I happen to use the tropea because I had it on hand. It's got a little bit of a sweetness to it, but any onion you have on hand works. So this is going to get cooked for about 6 minutes until we start getting a little bit of browning on there. I'll check it and make sure that my pan isn't too hot. I don't want to burn anything. And then we're going to stir it and cook it for another 3 or 4 minutes. So about 10 minutes total. Of cooking these to a nice deep caramelization flavor before we start adding tomatoes. And you notice I did not put the garlic in. Garlic is, if it's cooked for that long, I'm going to run the risk of it getting bitter. And so I'm just going to leave it out until we're ready for it. Now I'm going to start cutting up our tomatoes. It calls for 1.5 pounds of tomatoes. This is actually over 2 pounds, but these are heirlooms and you can see there's quite a bit of damage on them. And so I figure by the time I cut all the bad bits out, I'm probably going to be down to about 1.5 pounds. That is one of the prices you pay for growing heirloom tomatoes, and it is the reason that you don't see them commonly in grocery stores, because they are easily damaged. The loss on them in terms of production is quite a bit higher than a conventional tomato, and they don't ship well. The skins on them are very thin. They bruise easily, they crack easily, and so they are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful in flavor. But the reason that you don't see them grown conventionally is because they just are absolutely terrible as a large production, large-scale tomato. It's even hard. I used to sell them at farmer's market, and it's even hard to get them to farmer's market without having them damaged en route or cracked. I've set them down on the ground while I'm picking them and literally just had them crack just from setting them down on the ground, or having a blade of grass poke a hole in them. So yeah, they are very fussy, but they are well worth it for the flavor. The original recipe here just calls for a 28 ounce can of tomatoes. Obviously, I'm going to use fresh tomatoes because that is the whole point. But you can make this year-round if you can your own tomatoes and you have a nice quart-sized bottle of tomatoes. You could totally make this in the wintertime, and especially if you have frozen peppers at the same time. There's no reason this isn't a winter dish. I tend to save my my quarts of canned tomatoes for things like chili and other dishes. I don't usually think to make this in the winter. To me, it's a summer dish. This is all about fresh summer eating. So this multiple lobe, kind of funky, these are always a bit of a challenge to figure out how to clean up. But again, well worth the effort. I'm just going to cut off all of that part so that there's no damaged. And then a little bit of that green core there, totally edible, but we're tomato rich right now, so we can cut that out. All right, I can tell by the way that onion sounds that it needs a stir. We don't talk about that very often or think about it, and it took me years to learn that cooking is more than about your nose and your eyes. It's also about your ears. And you can totally tell when something is cooking, often where it's at, just by listening. All right, doing pretty good there. Not seeing any browning yet. This is called cat facing, and it's really common in heirloom varieties. And I can't remember, it has to do with how the blossom is. I think it's a fused blossom issue before it becomes an actual piece of fruit. Some varieties are more prone to it than others, and you do lose quite a bit when you cut that bit off. But again, worth it for the flavor. This particular tomato, I believe, is Paul Robeson. Oh, so good. And this one's new to me this year. It was recommended by Jess on Roots and Refuge Farm, which is a YouTuber that I watch a lot of. And I had never grown it before, and so I thought I'd try it this year. And it is a dark purple variety of tomato as opposed to a red variety. But beautiful big fruit and very tasty. I do like the dark colored tomatoes. I'm a big fan of Cherokee Purple. I'm also growing one called Anise. I can't remember the name of it. Anise something. As a third dark purple variety. I've tried Black Krim. Wasn't as fond of that. Cherokee Purple is kind of my benchmark. They are a pain in the ass in terms of growing them. They're fussy and they crack, and they give me a good harvest early in the season and then do nothing later in the season. But the flavor on them is so awesome that I keep growing them every year regardless. Best approach on something like this weird, crazy, fused tomato, is just cut it in half and start there. Because you can't really get in there otherwise. And a lot of this stuff is cosmetic, a little bit of scarring, probably from rubbing against something. Certainly not something that is bad to eat, but I'm gonna trim it out just because I want a little more smooth sauce. Yeah, so these take some work. These are not simple, quick tomato varieties like you get when you grow conventional hybrids. There we go. But this is also, I didn't weigh this, but I'm sure this was well over a pound. So it's a huge, huge tomato. A little bit of schmutz right in the middle there. That looks good. There we go. Done. Well worth the effort. And I'm just roughly dicing these. These are going to cook down quite a bit. I'm not worried about them being super fine. Man, that is a beautiful, beautiful color. All right, I can smell that I'm starting to get some caramelization over there. There we go, a little bit of browning. I'm gonna turn my heat down even further. All right, so we've reached about that 6-minute mark, just based on descriptive of getting a little bit of browning, and so now we want to soften everything up even more. So probably about another 3 or 4 minutes here, and we'll be ready for our tomatoes. This recipe, like I said, calls for a 28-ounce can. If I end up with extra, I'm not going to be sad. These are so stunning. And this is the time of year to eat tomatoes fresh. I literally don't eat tomatoes fresh except for mid-July through, if I'm lucky, the 1st of November. So this is definitely that recipe. I'm just not even going to bother with these little fiddly bits. Oops. am going to go ahead and mince this in my garlic press. I have this old garlic press. I'm not sure where it is. I know I've kept it, that I got out of my stepmother's house when I moved away to college, that is made in France. It says made in France on it, and I used it for about 20 years. And then I finally upgraded slightly. This garlic press has this thing on the back, which makes it much easier to clean. I spent a lot of time picking little bits of garlic out of the holes of my old one. But I feel like it's an heirloom. I love that my stepmom used it, and then I had it, and I don't know where she got it from, but I'm sure it was probably 20 plus years old when she got it, and so, yeah, it feels like a family legacy. And all of our compost either goes out to the chickens or goes into a worm bin, or right now we actually have a couple of cows that are just on loan that are out in our back pasture, and I've been feeding them oversized cucumbers and things like that. So no vegetable food waste on this farm. It all just gets turned into manure, which then feeds the soil. All right, let's see how we're doing here. So we're looking for some nice browning. Got some good color on there. And we want our vegetables to be softened up well. And you can see we've driven off some of the moisture. The volume has gotten a little bit smaller. I think we're good. I think that's about where we want to be. All right, I'm going to add in the garlic first, just to get a little bit of a sear on that before we add our tomatoes. And they always say just mix it in until you smell it. You know, that as soon as that heat hits that, you're going to get that nice hit of garlic. But a little bit of sauté on that is not going to be a bad thing. And it does smell glorious. All right, now we're going to add our tomatoes. And I'm guessing a good amount of salt. Actually, what I was supposed to do was to bloom my paprika and cumin in that pepper oil mixture before I added the tomatoes. I kind of jumped the gun. It's not going to be the end of the world. But now I'm going to add my paprika and cumin. You can use whole cumin seed in this if you want. I don't particularly love whole seeds in almost anything in terms of a pop. And so I tend to like ground cumin better than whole. I need 1.5 teaspoons to start of paprika. And as I mentioned, this is my own homegrown paprika powder. This, I primarily grow a variety of paprika called Bulldog, and it's B-O-L-D-O-G. And I've been growing that for years. It's a really lovely, sweet paprika. I've tried a bunch of different other kinds and have not liked them as well. So that's my favorite. And then 2 teaspoons of fresh cumin. I grind my own cumin from seed, and a lot of times I will toast the seed in a toaster oven before I grind it. So there's going to be some good flavor in that. I am going to add salt. It doesn't call for it right now, but it's also calling for canned tomatoes that are going to have quite a bit of salt in them. Because everything here has been fresh, I'm just going to add 1 teaspoon of kosher salt to this because I know it needs it. The other myth that you will see about cast iron is that you should never cook anything acidic in it. And so some of you out there are freaking out right now because I have tomatoes in my cast iron. Again, the reality is I've got a really good seasoning layer on this cast iron. It is polymerized oil that's almost like a plastic, and that tomato is not going to eat through that in the time that I'm cooking this down. So I am unconcerned about the fact that I just put tomatoes in my cast iron. We're going to let that come to a boil, simmer down a little bit to reduce, and then we'll go on to the next step. All right, we're back to our shakshuka. I actually ended up cooking this down for about 20 minutes, so about double the amount of time that it originally called for, just because those tomatoes were super juicy, and so there was a lot of liquid in here. You can see it's still really liquidy, but we're much better than we were. And I could probably go another 5 minutes, but I'm also starving, so I'm gonna actually just make some breakfast. So this is at a nice gentle simmer, and what we're going to do is poach our eggs in the shakshuka. The original recipe calls for 6 eggs. Because we don't have 3 people, I'm just going to do 4 eggs, and then if there's leftover sauce, I'll make a quick version of this tomorrow for breakfast. Oop, that was a little bit of a funky egg. It's all right. We'll poach it. These are homegrown chicken eggs that are cracking weirdly. And normally, if this was thicker, you would make a little bit of a well to put your egg in. But this is juicy enough that it's not going to hold a shape if I do a well. But that's okay. There's clearly plenty of liquid in there to poach. And I'm just going to do a little all-purpose seasoning on the top of those eggs. I'll link to this in the description. I have a recipe for it. It's a very simple all-purpose seasoning I've been making for ages. And this actually has the addition of some ground dried chives in it, garlic chives, because I happened to have some on the counter the other day that I had used for a different recipe and then dried the rest of them, and so I threw it into the mix. So it's got a little onion in it, which is not typical. I'm going to let this poach for about 5 minutes, so we'll come back here in 5 minutes and see how we look. All right, so these have been poaching for 5 minutes. And that's about what I want to see. You can, if you've got some spots that are not quite set all the way, you can ladle your sauce over. That one looks really good. This one looks good. And honestly, a lot of times, even though this serves 6, we will end up eating all of it with just 4 eggs. This would be really great served with a beautiful crusty loaf of bread. We don't do, that one's a little underdone. I'm just gonna put some hot on there to cook that while it's sitting in the thing. We don't do a lot of bread. We're both older and our metabolisms have shifted. Thank you, menopause. And if I eat bread, my body hangs on to every calorie like it's never going to be fed again. And so it just makes me gain weight very quickly. So I have, and then aches and pains that go along with that. Kind of minor arthritis issues that is aggravated by gluten. And so, yeah, I don't do a lot of bread. I miss it. But we are going to top this. You can top this with anything you want. We're going to do a little bit of cilantro and a lot of feta. Feta is a classic accompaniment to this. If you wanted to go more of a Mexican route, you could do cojeta, would also be very good. but we're going to do feta. Olives is another suggestion. I'm not a huge olive eater, so I'm going to skip that. But feta, definitely. And this is chunk feta. I tend to love brined feta the very most. And so if I can find brined feta, that's what I buy. A lot of times I can't find it. And I'm just going to crumble this over the top. Beautiful. And I tasted this sauce. It probably could have used at least another half a teaspoon of salt. And then I forgot to put it in. But this feta is really salty. And so that's going to help mitigate the fact that the sauce is, in my opinion, slightly undersalted. So know that going in. I'll amend the recipe when I write it up for you guys. But I would add at least a teaspoon and a half of kosher salt. And then I think a little fresh ground. My hands are slippery from washing. A little fresh ground black pepper, never hurt. And there you go, shakshuka. Favorite, super healthy summer breakfast or dinner, or lunch, honestly. It's good for any time. But this is a glorious use of all of your summer veg, and literally almost everything in here, with the exception of the olive oil and the salt and pepper, came from the farm. So please make this. It is so, so good. And have a wonderful summer tomato season.